I stood there on her doorstep, the bag of groceries slipping in my hands as she told me I was an embarrassment. My own daughter, the one I raised, fed, and fought for, shut the door in my face without a flicker of guilt. Behind her, my son-in-law scrolled his phone like I wasn't even there. I'd been tossed out like trash. She thought I'd disappear quietly. Instead, I started planning. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Maggie pressed her thumb to the buzzer marked Claire and Derek and waited, cradling a paper bag of groceries that sagged slightly under the weight of a roast chicken, a bouquet of tulips, and a half-melted pint of pistachio gelato, Claire's favorite. The sun was sinking behind the condo towers, leaving the sidewalk glazed in amber and shadow. No answer. She pressed again. After a minute, the door clicked open. Claire stood barefoot in the hallway, wearing a silk robe that looked expensive and barely covered her thighs. Her hair was pinned up like she was headed to a red carpet and not lounging at home on a Tuesday. Maggie smiled softly. "I thought I'd surprise you. Brought dinner." Claire didn't move. "You can't just show up like this." Maggie blinked. "What?" Claire's eyes darted down to the grocery bag, then past Maggie to the hallway. "We live in a building with security, Maggie. It's not quaint. It's not the suburbs. You can't treat this place like you're dropping in on your neighbor with a casserole." "I just thought we could talk," Maggie said quietly, the edges of her voice starting to splinter. Claire folded her arms, exhaling. "People will think we're broke." Maggie frowned. "What? You coming in with groceries like that? Like you're delivering charity? It's pathetic." Behind Claire, Derek's voice floated in, casual and cold. "It's about space, boundaries. We've talked about this." Maggie's stomach knotted. She hadn't even seen him standing there, leaning against the kitchen counter in joggers and a t-shirt, scrolling through his phone like none of this mattered. "I haven't seen you in weeks," Maggie whispered. Claire rolled her eyes. "That's not my fault. You didn't answer my calls." "Because I don't owe you anything anymore," Claire snapped. "God, Maggie, you make everything about you. You always have." Maggie clutched the paper bag tighter, her fingers whitening at the knuckles. "I raised you. I gave up everything to." "You didn't raise me," Claire spat, stepping forward now, voice sharpened like glass. "You clung to me. Big difference." Derek glanced up briefly, then looked back at his phone. Claire's tone dipped, venomous and low. "You're an embarrassment. Still showing up with your little errands and your sad food like it means something. It doesn't." Maggie stared at her. For a second, her mind couldn't translate the words. They landed like cold rain she hadn't expected, each syllable numbing a different part of her. "Get out," Claire said. Maggie nodded slowly, one step back, then two. The tulips trembled in the bag. She turned without a word and walked down the hallway. Her shoes scuffed against the tile, in a rhythm that sounded too loud, like something breaking. The elevator took forever. She didn't cry, not in front of that door, not in front of them. When it finally dinged open, the building superintendent, Harold, stood inside holding a mop and bucket. He looked up from his phone and gave her a once-over. "Evenin', Maggie," she forced a small nod, eyes fixed ahead. He stepped out to let her in, then muttered behind her shoulder, low and bitter. "She treats everyone like garbage. Don't take it personal." The doors slid shut. Inside the elevator, the bag finally tore. The gelato hit the floor with a dull, pitiful thud. Maggie stared down at it. She didn't move. The elevator kept descending. The house was too quiet. Maggie locked the deadbolt behind her, set the torn grocery bag on the kitchen counter, and slid the wilted tulips into the trash without looking at them. Her fingers still smelled faintly of chicken grease and powdered sugar from the cookies she'd baked last night, before she'd convinced herself Claire might be happy to see her. She turned on no lights. Instead, she walked to the back room, the one that used to be her home office. Back when words like tenure, appraisal, and municipal zoning had meant something. Dust lined the blinds. A framed certificate on the wall, outstanding contribution to urban redevelopment, hung slightly crooked, and Maggie didn't fix it. She knelt beside the filing cabinet in the corner and twisted the key. The lock gave with a metallic click. Row after row of labeled folders. She slid out the one marked Pension Long-Term Assets and laid it flat on the desk. Next came savings plus secondary accounts, then federal, state, retirement. She didn't hesitate. She started adding numbers, cross-checking her handwritten notes against recent printouts, her lips silently forming each figure. 30 years of careful habits, coupon clipping, off-brand peanut butter, no impulse buys. It added up. Maggie stared at the total for a long time, then circled it with a red pen. She didn't need all of it to survive. Not anymore. Her hand drifted to the back of the drawer, where a thin file, unlabeled, had been shoved behind a stack of insurance policies. She pulled it out slowly. Inside were loose sheets, property tax maps, coded zoning overlays, 2 yellowed notebooks filled with half-legible field notes. Her handwriting, still careful back then. Parcel lots, elevation data, infrastructure vulnerability. Her eyes flicked down the margin of one page. Note, 900 block, Seaview Complex, unstable, HOA lies, water lines old, will collapse in 5 to 7 years if not replaced. She froze. Seaview, Claire's building. Her fingers hovered over the words, then closed the notebook. The air around her felt suddenly heavier, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Her phone vibrated against the desk. Sophie W. Incoming call. She blinked. Sophie Warren, her former student. Now a top-performing realtor with 3 billboards across the South Side and a YouTube channel with 20,000 subscribers. She answered. Sophie? Maggie, just saw your message. What's going on? I need a quick pulse on a building. The Seaview Complex on 9th. There was a pause. Then, that place? Rumor is it's about to hit foreclosure. Quiet auction coming up. Whole thing's a mess. Plumbing's shot. 3 liens from a defunct HOA. 1 major tenant defaulted. Maggie's lips parted slightly. Sophie continued. If you're thinking of investing, jump fast. The city doesn't even want it. Word is they'll let it go for dirt. Maggie didn't answer at first. She just sat there in the quiet hum of her old office, the red pen still in her hand, the pension folder open like a wound. Then slowly, like muscle memory she'd forgotten she had, she smiled. A real one, small, tight, but it stayed. Thanks, Sophie, she said. I'll be in touch. She hung up. The smile was still there. Anthony Russo's law office sat above a strip of unremarkable shops. A dry cleaner, a vape store, and a taqueria that always smelled like scorched meat and lime. The building was older than it looked. Pre-war, probably. Brick and narrow windows. Quiet. Maggie liked that. She buzzed the intercom. Yeah, came the voice. Gruff. East Coast. Familiar. It's me. The door buzzed open without another word. Anthony hadn't changed. Same gray sport coat with the elbow patches. Same cluttered desk layered with legal pads and half-full coffee mugs. A dusty Red Sox cap hung on a coat hook behind him, right above a black and white photo of his father shaking hands with a federal judge. He stood when she entered, gave her a brief, uncertain hug. Jesus, Maggie, been too long. She sat across from him and dropped a manila envelope onto his desk. I want to buy a building, she said. He blinked. All right, she opened the envelope. Inside, copies of her pension summaries, the zoning map of the 900 block, and a note in her own handwriting, Seaview Complex, 9th and Grayson. He flipped through the papers, eyebrows lifting. You're serious? Dead. Anthony looked up. That's Claire's place, isn't it? Maggie nodded. She told me I was an embarrassment, told me to get out. Derek didn't say a word. Just stood there on his damn phone like I didn't exist. Anthony leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly through his nose. And now you want to buy her building. Not just buy it, Maggie said. Take it, quietly. I want her blindsided. Anthony nodded slowly, fingers tapping the desk. Then he stood and pulled a leather binder from his bookshelf. Okay, then we don't do this in your name. We do it through a trust. He flipped it open. You create an LLC, shell company under a blind trust. Everything flows through a registered agent. No paper trail to you. Claire and Derek will get the eviction notice and never know where it came from until it's too late. Maggie sat still, spine straight. The tension in her shoulders had shifted. It no longer vibrated with grief, but with precision. What kind of timeline are we talking? She asked. Depends on the auction terms, but if Sophie's right and the HOA's belly up, the bank will want to offload fast. Could be as little as 30 days, maybe less. I'll move today, Anthony smiled faintly. You always were the smartest one in the room. I never needed to be, Maggie said, until now. He flipped to a blank page and started writing. You'll need a financial partner for speed. Bank loans are slow, even on cash-ready assets. I figured. Still in touch with Victor Halpern? Maggie's face twitched, just for a second. She hadn't thought of Victor in years, not since the City Planning Commission hearings. They'd disagreed often, but he'd respected her judgment. And he had money, quiet money. I can reach out, she said. I'll call him directly, Anthony replied. He owes me a favor. If he's willing to front you the bridge capital, we can push the filing tomorrow, Maggie nodded. Good, Anthony tapped the envelope. This is everything you're willing to risk? All of it, he paused. That's bold. She took everything that mattered, Maggie said quietly. So now I'll take everything she depends on. A silence settled between them, not awkward, not cold. Just still. Anthony stood, extended his hand. I'll get started. Maggie shook it, firm and steady. Her fingers didn't tremble. Claire raised her wine glass and tilted her head back like a socialite in a made-for-TV movie. I had to throw my mother out last week, she said, laughing as if it were charming. She showed up with a grocery bag, like we needed help. Can you imagine? Across the table, her cousin Nora gave a tight, polite laugh. She didn't quite meet Claire's eyes. Derek, halfway through a second martini, grinned. She's probably in some dingy apartment by now, or back in that sad little house she never upgraded, with the floral curtains and the Jesus magnets on the fridge. Claire chuckled, swirling her drink. I mean, boundaries are healthy, right? I'm not responsible for her anymore. Nora excused herself to check on her daughter, and the conversation moved on. But across the restaurant, unnoticed behind a magazine and oversized sunglasses, a woman sat with a legal pad on her lap, jotting notes. Not every word, just enough to remember the rhythm of it. Maggie didn't flinch when the server bumped her chair or when a child screamed at a table nearby. She didn't eat. She just listened, observed, noted who Claire chose to impress, and how easily she discarded the ones who disappointed her. That night back home, Maggie opened a new document folder on her desktop. She titled it Exhibit 1, Statements and Public Behavior. Each page would have its purpose. 2 days later, Harold met her in the back alley behind the Seaview complex, next to the dumpster where the HOA tossed broken office chairs and unused signs about quiet hours. You didn't get this from me, Harold muttered, handing over a stained envelope sealed with tape. I never get anything from anyone, Maggie replied, tucking it into her canvas tote without looking. Inside were hand-copied complaint slips and maintenance requests that had gone ignored, many of them with Claire's name at the top. Unauthorized parties, noise after midnight, aggressive conduct toward neighbors, late fees unpaid, refusals to respond to board notices. She thinks she owns the place, Harold said, adjusting his cap. Walks around like everyone should thank her for breathing. Does anyone push back? No one wants to get on her bad side, but they all complain to me. She'll be accountable soon, Maggie said, calmly. Harold raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask. He just nodded once. then went back inside. In Sophie's office, sunlight filtered through slatted blinds as she slid a manila folder across the glass table. "Here's what you're really buying," Sophie said. 12% of the units are empty. Another 30% are behind on rent or HOA dues. The pool hasn't passed code in 3 years. Structurally, it's a ticking clock. Maggie flipped through the pages without reacting. "This is perfect," she said, voice cool. "Claire thinks she's sitting on something valuable. She's sitting on a disaster, but it'll appraise well enough to mask the rot." Then we timed the pressure carefully. Sophie smiled, impressed. "God, I forgot how sharp you were." "I haven't been sleeping much." "That'll help," Sophie said. "You'll need a killer poker face." That night, Anthony emailed her the trust agreement, complete with digital signature lines. Windward Properties, LLC. Maggie stared at the name for a long time. It sounded like something Claire would trust. Nautical, crisp, aspirational. It could have been a vacation brand or a fake philanthropy. She signed. 10 minutes later, Anthony's message pinged back. "Done. Registered in Delaware. Corporate veil holds tight. Auction papers incoming." Maggie closed the laptop. She stood at the window in her kitchen, staring at the neighbor's porch light across the yard. It blinked off and on every 30 seconds, some faulty motion sensor no one had ever bothered to fix. She watched it blink, counted the rhythm, waited for the right moment. The conference room in the municipal annex smelled faintly of stale coffee and carpet glue. Rows of gray stackable chairs faced a podium at the front, where a man in a wrinkled blazer was checking his mic and adjusting a stack of folders. Maggie sat near the back, flanked by Sophie on her right and Anthony on her left. All three of them were dressed to disappear. Neutral blazers, no perfume, clean lines. Just enough polish to be taken seriously, not enough to invite curiosity. She held no paddle. That would have drawn attention. Instead, Sophie was the registered bidder, her credentials tied to Windward Properties, LLC. Maggie was a financial consultant, nothing more. The auctioneer tapped the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin with Lot 12, 9th and Grayson, otherwise known as the Seaview Residential Complex." A shuffle of folders, pages turning, bidders murmuring. "The property has outstanding lien issues and deferred maintenance. Starting bid, $712,000. Silence. Then a hand raised from the second row. A man in a charcoal suit with a clipboard and a Bluetooth in one ear. $720, the auctioneer called. Another bidder jumped in. $740. Sophie didn't move. She had one leg crossed over the other, her fingertips resting lightly on her thigh. $760, said the man with the Bluetooth. $785, someone barked from the back. Maggie's pulse thudded behind her ribs. Anthony leaned in, voice low. "Let them tire each other out." Sophie waited. The bids volleyed like dull artillery, deliberate, tense. Each increment a test. $815. $830. $850. The auctioneer adjusted his tie, his voice beginning to tighten. Sophie turned slightly toward Maggie, just enough for their eyes to meet. "Now?" Maggie gave the barest nod. Sophie raised her hand. $875, the auctioneer called. Silence again. The Bluetooth bidder frowned and scribbled something. His phone lit up. He didn't raise his hand. $875, once. The other man hesitated, then raised. $890. Sophie didn't blink. $910. That got murmurs. Maggie stared ahead, hands in her lap, breathing through her teeth. She wouldn't let them see it. Not the nerves, not the stakes, not the ruin tucked behind her composure. Going once? A long pause. Twice. No one moved. Sold. $910,000 to Windward Properties, LLC. The gavel cracked down like thunder. For half a second, no one clapped. Then someone at the back gave a light, scattered applause. Others joined in politely, like it was theater, and they weren't sure if it was intermission or the end. Maggie stayed seated. Anthony leaned in, whispering so low she almost didn't hear him. It's done. Sophie squeezed her wrist once. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet pulse of solidarity. Maggie exhaled, the air trembling in her lungs. For the first time in weeks, her fingers shook. She folded them together. Her name wasn't on any deed. No headline would mention her. Claire wouldn't even know the building had changed hands. Not yet. Harold peeled the tape from the back of the laminated notice, then smoothed it carefully onto the Seaview lobby bulletin board. Dead center. Right between a missing cat poster and a faded flyer for a tenant yoga night that never actually happened. Notice of new ownership and management. Windward Properties, LLC effective. Immediately, he stepped back, admired the alignment, then tacked up 4 smaller versions near the mailboxes, the elevator, and each stairwell landing. No fanfare, no announcements, just paper and authority. By 10 a.m., Claire had already seen 2 of them. She sipped her coffee from a monogrammed tumbler and rolled her eyes. Finally, she muttered to a neighbor in the hallway, "This place is falling apart. New management might actually fix the elevator." The woman nodded but didn't say much. Just glanced at the notice again and walked off. Claire strutted back toward her condo, flipping her hair like someone important had just agreed with her. "Windward," she said aloud, trying the name out like it belonged to her. "Sounds fancy." The next morning, the letters arrived, printed on crisp cream stock with gold lettering and a heavy seal. Windward Properties, LLC, Residential Policy Update. Claire tore hers open without reading the return address. Then she froze. Rent adjustment effective next cycle. Pursuant to Section 8.1 of the new management terms, tenant rents will adjust to reflect updated market conditions and prior deferred increases. New monthly total, $4,340 increase, 41.7%. Her coffee slipped, splashing across the marble island. She scanned the page again, heart rate spiking. "No, no, no, this isn't legal!" She stormed into the hallway barefoot, letter in hand. "Harold," she called out. "Harold!" He was mopping by the vending machine, slow, unbothered. She held the paper in front of his face. "What the hell is this?" Harold squinted at the letter, then wiped his hands on his coveralls. "Looks like your rent just went up." "You think this is funny," he shrugged. "Not really. This is extortion. Take it up with your landlord," she blinked. "Aren't you still part of the HOA? He gave her a look. "You're 3 months behind on your dues. HOA doesn't answer to you anymore. Windward does." She glared at him, mouth open, but no words came. Behind her, someone's dog barked. A door slammed. Life went on. In the kitchen, Derek read the letter 3 times. "I thought rent control capped it." Claire paced barefoot, furious. "It's not technically rent controlled. It's market stabilized, which means, God, I don't know, someone must have sold the building." Derek dropped into a bar stool. "We can't swing this." Claire spun on him. "It's a bluff. They're testing us." "No, it's a formal notice. They're locking in market rate. We've never paid that much, not even when we lived downtown." Derek opened the credit card app on his phone. "We're already over on 2 cards. Then transfer the balance. We'll fight it. I'll file a complaint. I'll call someone." Derek said nothing. His thumb hovered over the screen. "The city card's already at 92%. I can't move anything else." Claire stood there, hair still wet from the shower, robe untied at the waist. She looked smaller, less composed. "Jesus," she whispered. Downstairs, Harold watched her window from the courtyard. He leaned against the bench with a soda in hand and grinned. "Windward," he muttered to himself, as if tasting it. The courtroom was smaller than Claire expected. No polished mahogany, no dramatic echo of heels on marble. Just industrial carpet, tan walls, and a cheap flag leaning slightly in its stand near the judge's bench. Still, she'd dressed for TV. A tailored navy suit, pearls that hadn't seen daylight since Derek's promotion party, and heels sharp enough to draw blood. Her hair was set in soft waves, and her makeup was exact, just enough to look concerned, but not unhinged. Derek sat 2 seats away in wrinkled khakis and a gray button-up that still smelled faintly of the dry cleaner's plastic. Claire clutched her manila folder like it was armor. Across the aisle, Anthony Russo sat in perfect stillness. No theatrics. Just a neutral gray suit and a single folder marked Windward Properties, LLC. He didn't smile. He didn't blink much either. If you didn't know better, you'd think he was bored. The clerk called the case, Langston versus Windward Properties, LLC. Judge Warner entered, late 50s, clean-shaven, glasses balanced low on the bridge of his nose. He looked like a man who didn't tolerate filler words or wasted time. Petitioner present? He asked. Claire stood. Yes, Your Honor. Respondent? Anthony Rose. Yes, Your Honor. Anthony Russo. Counsel for Windward Properties. All right, Warner said, settling into his chair. Ms. Langston, you're contesting the rent increase implemented by Windward Properties? Yes, Your Honor, 41%. With no notice, no justification, no negotiation. Judge Warner flipped through the file, then glanced over the top of his glasses. You received the letter dated 2 weeks prior to the effective change? Yes, but that meets the minimum legal threshold for notice in this jurisdiction. Claire's throat tightened. But it's excessive. No one raises rent 40% overnight. Anthony rose calmly. Your Honor, the previous owners had not raised rent in over 5 years. The building is not rent-controlled, merely market-stabilized. The increase brings all units into compliance with current fair market value, which we've documented. He passed a bound report to the clerk, who handed it to the judge. Claire tried to speak, but Warner held up a hand. This report includes neighborhood comparables, tax assessments, and the building's structural deficiencies? Yes, Your Honor, Anthony said. We've also included proof of capital improvements underway, fire code updates, plumbing replacements, ADA compliance upgrades. Judge Warner nodded slowly. Claire gripped her folder tighter. Your Honor, we've been good tenants. We've paid every month. Actually, Anthony interjected smoothly, we have payment records indicating your last 3 payments were received after the 5th of the month, and February's rent was short by $118. Claire turned to Derek, eyes wide. You said you paid that. Derek cleared his throat, staring down. I thought I did. You didn't, Anthony said flatly. Windward waived the late fees, but the shortfall remains on record. Judge Warner exhaled. Miss Langston, I understand this is frustrating, but your lease allows for market adjustments provided adequate notice is given, which it was. Your personal financial situation, while unfortunate, doesn't change the legality of the adjustment. Claire's voice cracked. We're not wealthy. We're already drowning in bills. We can't just absorb this. Anthony didn't flinch. The judge looked to Derek. Sir, do you wish to add anything? Derek swallowed. We're trying, Your Honor. Credit cards, some personal loans. We're just underwater. Anthony waited a beat, then said, Windward has offered early lease termination options and flexible payment structuring for tenants who reach out directly. Ms. Langston has not. I didn't know who to call, Claire shouted. There's no phone number, no contact, just a mailbox in Delaware. Anthony tapped the top of his file. Our registered agent is listed publicly. We received 6 calls from other tenants this week. We responded to each within 48 hours. Judge Warner leaned back. I've heard enough. Claire's chest rose and fell too fast. I'm upholding the rent increase as legal and procedurally valid. If you wish to terminate your lease early, contact the management company for options. The gavel didn't slam. It just touched down with the soft finality of a sealed fate. Next case, the clerk called. Claire didn't move. Derek stood first, waited a second, then gently touched her elbow. She pulled away, jaw clenched, and followed him out of the courtroom without looking back. Outside, the wind caught her blazer and flared it open. She stopped near the bench at the sidewalk, trembling with rage. They're vultures, she spat. Greedy, faceless cowards. Derek said nothing, just pulled out his phone and checked his credit card app again like it might suddenly hold different numbers. Claire turned and looked at the courthouse steps, then back toward the street. Windward, she muttered, like a curse. The living room looked like a showroom again. but not in the curated, Pinterest-perfect way Claire preferred. This time, everything was laid out with purpose. Velvet-lined boxes, silk pouches, dust bags with gold lettering, jewelry, purses, watches, displayed like merchandise, not memories. Claire held a black crocodile clutch to the light and checked the corner stitching. Retail was $3,600, she muttered. Derek stood across from her, arms crossed, watching like he didn't know whether to laugh or flinch. You really think someone's going to buy that? I've got 3 bids already. Fashion resale is a blood sport. Don't underestimate desperate women with Amex points. She snapped a photo, uploaded it to the listing, and moved to the next item. The pearl earrings Derek had given her on their anniversary went into a smaller pouch. She didn't hesitate. They were short 1 month's rent and 2 payments on the car. The credit cards had stopped accepting balance transfers, and last night, their grocery delivery declined. That afternoon, Derek sat in the guest room, door shut, scrolling through contacts on his phone. He didn't bother with his parents. His father had warned him about Claire years ago, and his mother didn't return calls unless someone was dying. He tried his college roommate, then an old boss, then his cousin Kevin in Tempe. Each conversation went the same way. I wish I could, man, but things are tight right now. Can't co-sign anything, my wife'd kill me. You should really talk to a financial advisor. Click, click, click. By the 5th rejection, Derek stopped trying to sound upbeat. He hung up the phone and stared at the drywall for a long time. Somewhere in the other room, Claire was repackaging a Louis Vuitton duffel bag she'd once sworn she'd be buried with. Maggie watched from her back porch, a mug of chamomile steaming in her hand. She didn't need binoculars, just quiet. Claire hadn't responded to her last text. Not that Maggie expected her to, but the silence was telling. And now the UPS driver was coming twice a day. A little bubble envelope yesterday. A mid-sized flat-rate box this morning. Claire's arms crossed every time she signed for something. Defensive. Maggie took a sip, watching condensation curl around the rim of the glass door across the complex. Derek's shadow moved behind it, pacing. She said nothing, just rocked slowly in the porch chair. Let the wind do the talking. Harold stood in the basement, pen in hand, clipboard against his thigh. Every rent check went through him first, every late fee logged by hand before the online system updated. Old habits. Claire and Derek had paid half of this month's total, no explanation, no note. Just a cashier's check and a memo that read, partial, full payment forthcoming. He circled the entry. 3rd time they'd come up short. 4th if you counted February. He clicked his pen and made a separate notation under his private sheet. Tenant, Claire Langston. Status, chronic delinquency. 3 strikes. Next step, legal prep. Per LLC policy, file 9A. He folded the sheet into a blue folder and slid it into the drawer marked Pending Eviction Internal Use Only. Then he went upstairs to mop the elevator again. Didn't need it. Just liked the noise it made. Sophie spun her monitor around to show Maggie the screen. Market tanked. Again. A red graph plunged diagonally across the screen. Numbers stacked like casualties. No one's buying? Maggie asked. Not in this zone. Over-leveraged. Outdated. And now windwards raising rents? Everyone's spooked. Maggie nodded. So if Claire tried to sell, she'd get pennies, if that. She'd owe more than she clears. Good. Sophie looked up. You okay? I am now. Maggie stood, straightened her scarf, and picked up her bag. Send me Harold's log next week, she said. You got it. Anthony sat in his office late that night, desk lamp casting a soft yellow pool over the thick folder in front of him. Each tenant had their own tab. Claire's was thicker than most. He pulled out the latest rent receipt, stapled it to the back of the file, and opened a fresh form. Notice to quit, Form 24C. Cause, non-payment of rent. Grace period exhausted. He filled out the date, typed in the address, left the final signature line blank, for now. He picked up his phone and texted Maggie. Ready to file. Just say the word. Harold didn't look up from his clipboard when Derek stormed toward the leasing office. Hoodie half-zipped, sneakers untied, breath rising in white bursts under the morning sun. You gonna tell me what the hell this is? Derek slapped a thick white envelope onto the counter. Harold blinked once behind his smudged glasses. That's the notice. No, I know what it is. I'm asking why. We paid half. Derek's voice cracked, pitched too high. Harold calmly clicked his pen. Windward Properties, that's all. That's all? Derek leaned in, knuckles whitening on the edge of the counter. We've lived here 5 years. Harold finally met his gaze. And missed rent 4 times. He turned back to the sheet, drew a slow circle around a number. Deliberate. Final. Derek stood frozen, teeth grinding. Then he slammed the door on his way out, hard enough to rattle the window blinds. Claire was already awake, barefoot in the hallway, hair wild, robe half open. She hadn't slept, not with the paper taped to their door like a scarlet letter. She ripped it off at dawn, scanned it 3 times, and threw it into the sink. Now she paced the hallway like a caged animal, arms twitching every time a floorboard creaked. Where are they? She hissed. Derek didn't answer. Claire turned sharply and opened the apartment door without checking the peephole. Hey, she shouted into the corridor. 2 teenagers halfway to the stairwell froze. They were laughing, carrying a half-empty pizza box. You leave garbage by our door last night? She barked. The taller one blinked. What? No, lady. Don't lie to me. She advanced on them, voice sharp enough to draw heads from windows. We didn't touch your door, the other muttered, backing down the stairs. Claire threw up her hands, turned around, and slammed the door. Inside, Derek watched from the couch. What the hell was that? He whirled. They think we're a joke now. That's what this place does. It eats you until people forget you ever had value. Derek stayed quiet, but something in his eyes cracked. She saw it and hated it. You want to wait for them to throw our stuff on the curb? She snapped. Do you? He said nothing. Claire spun toward the bedroom, flung open the closet, and yanked down a suitcase. The handle stuck. She kicked it hard. Anthony locked his office at exactly noon. Sunlight cut sharp lines across the front steps as he made his way down, file folder tucked under one arm, sunglasses masking whatever doubt might linger. He passed the Langstons' door without pausing, slid the notice between the weather stripping and the frame, pressed it in with the back of his knuckle. Then he walked down to his car and drove away. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Policy. Sophie leaned against the back wall of the coffee shop, earbuds in, but not playing anything. She watched Claire storm through the parking lot, throw a bag into the back seat of the Lexus, and slam the door with enough force to set off a passing car alarm. She still doesn't know it's you, Sophie said softly. Maggie didn't answer right away. She was sitting in the window seat, coat draped over her knees, eyes locked on Claire's furious movements. She thinks it's Windward, or Harold, or the economy, Sophie added, sipping from her lukewarm latte. Hell, she probably thinks it's karma. Maggie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Let her think whatever she wants, she said, rising to her feet. Sophie hesitated. You sure about that? I'm sure about one thing, Maggie replied, pulling on her gloves. She won't know the truth until I decide it's time. That night, Claire stood on the balcony, wind slicing her skin through the thin cotton of her robe. She gripped the railing hard, nails digging into the flaking paint. Below her, headlights passed. Someone walked their dog. Laughter echoed from Building C. Her world was falling apart, and outside, everything just continued. She turned back inside and caught her reflection in the sliding glass door. Hollow-eyed, tight-lipped. Not the woman who used to host wine tastings or wear $1,000 heels to brunch. She didn't recognize herself. Worse, she didn't know who to blame anymore. She spun suddenly, stormed into the bedroom, and yanked open her laptop. A new listing had just sold. Her vintage Cartier gone, less than half what she paid. She slammed the lid shut, breathing hard. Across the courtyard, Maggie turned off her porch light and slipped back inside. She didn't need to see any more. The seed had taken root, and rot always spread from the inside out. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and cold coffee. Everything echoed, the shuffle of feet, the soft cough of someone 2 rows back, the sharp clack of the judge's pen tapping against her binder. Claire sat at the plaintiff's table, lips pressed into a pale line, hair pulled back too tight. She wore the only blazer that still fit, navy, creased at the elbows, dry clean tags still tucked into the hem. Derek sat beside her, slumped but silent, neck red above his collar. He hadn't shaved. His tie was borrowed. Docket 7214C, Windward Properties versus Claire and Derek Langston, the bailiff called. Anthony stood, buttoning his jacket in a single motion. Harold followed 2 steps behind, carrying a green accordion folder thick with documentation. Claire rose slowly, her knees trembled. Judge Warner, a woman in her 50s with sharp cheekbones and a reputation for zero tolerance, adjusted her glasses and looked down from the bench. "Who's speaking for the defendants?" "I am," Claire said. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't flinch. "You may proceed," Claire cleared her throat. "We've lived at Willow Court for over 5 years. We've always intended to pay. This isn't a pattern of disregard. It's a hardship." Her hands shook slightly as she picked up the papers she'd printed that morning, bank statements, payment receipts, an email to the leasing office. She held them out, but the clerk didn't take them right away. "We lost income. My freelance work dried up when the market collapsed, and Derek's last project didn't pay out in time." She looked toward the judge. "We're selling what we can, trying to stay afloat. 30 days is all we need." Judge Warner's gaze didn't waver. "Thank you, Mrs. Langston. Mr. Anthony." Anthony stepped forward with crisp authority. "Windward Properties has submitted all supporting documentation, including the lease terms signed by the defendants." He placed the folder on the table, opened it with practiced ease. "This is not a sudden or singular issue. Late payments began last November. February was short. May went unpaid. Partial payments in June and August. 3 separate notices were served, 2 acknowledged in writing. No formal dispute was filed by the tenants." He looked toward Harold. "Mr. Parnell manages day-to-day operations and can testify to tenant behavior." Harold took the stand slowly. His shoes squeaked once on the linoleum. "Claire and Derek Langston have been inconsistent," he said plainly. "Loud arguments, doors slamming at odd hours, neighbors submitting complaints. Apartment 2D mentioned threats. Apartment 4C says their packages were tampered with." Claire jolted slightly. "That's not true." The judge held up a hand without looking at her. "You'll have a chance to respond." Harold cleared his throat. "We have record of 3 separate disturbances logged this quarter. 1 led to a written warning." Anthony nodded. "Given the financial history and tenant behavior, Windward Properties is moving forward under just cause." The judge turned to Derek. "Mr. Langston, do you have anything to add?" Derek opened his mouth, closed it, then said quietly, "We couldn't keep up." The room fell still. Claire stared at him, stunned. Her face went pale, then red. "You said," she began, but her voice died in her throat. Judge Warner flipped through the file once, quickly. Her gavel remained untouched. "I appreciate both parties' statements," she said, "but the lease agreement is binding. The landlord followed correct protocol and presented substantial evidence. You've been granted multiple extensions already." Claire blinked rapidly. "The court grants eviction. The defendants have 30 calendar days to vacate." The gavel dropped. Claire inhaled sharply, almost a gasp. Not loud, but unmistakable. The kind of breath that comes when you realize something is over before you were ready to let go. Derek didn't move. His hands stayed clenched in his lap, fingers twitching slightly. The clerk called the next case. Anthony stood. Harold followed. Neither looked back. Claire turned to Derek slowly, her voice low and venomous. "You folded. You rolled over like it didn't matter." "It does matter," he said, standing up. but not more than the truth. She stared at him like he'd just slapped her. Outside the courtroom, Maggie sat on a bench near the vending machine, legs crossed, sunglasses on. She never looked up, but a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth as they passed. Claire didn't see her. Not yet. Claire didn't knock. She shoved open the leasing office door with both hands, sending it ricocheting off the stopper like a shotgun blast. The blinds rattled. Harold flinched, then blinked slowly, like he'd been expecting it. "I want the name," Claire snapped. Harold leaned back in his chair. The clipboard in his lap didn't move. "Excuse me." "The owner," she hissed, stepping closer. "Not the property manager, not the LLC. I want the name of whoever's behind Windward." Now, behind her, the automatic door hissed shut. "You got your 30 days, Harold said calmly. "There's nothing left to discuss." Claire slammed both palms on his desk. "You think this is over? I'll drag every file, every violation, every shady loophole your office has ever pulled straight to the zoning board. I'll find out who's hiding behind that paperwork and put them on blast in the press." Harold raised an eyebrow. "You think the zoning board takes anonymous Yelp reviews?" Claire opened her mouth, but the door behind her opened again. Anthony entered, crisp as always, dark coat buttoned against the September wind. But he wasn't alone. Maggie walked in beside him, a faint smile brushing her lips like it had been waiting weeks to bloom. Claire turned, her voice caught. "What the hell is she doing here?" Anthony said nothing, just stepped aside. Maggie took one step forward. "It's me," she said. Claire stared at her, not comprehending. "What's you?" she said slowly. "I'm the owner," Maggie said, letting the words settle. "I bought out the silent partner of Windward Properties 9 months ago." Silence fell like a hammer. Claire blinked. Derek, who had followed her in late, stopped in his tracks. "You've got to be kidding me." Maggie's voice was calm, even. "You both thought I was gone. Cut out, cut off. You threw me out like furniture when I stopped being useful." Claire's jaw opened, but no sound came out. Maggie tilted her head slightly. "Now I've returned the favor, just legally." Claire's face drained of color. Derek took one slow step forward. "You manipulated the entire system just to get back at us." "No," Maggie said. "I own the system you thought was working against you. There's a difference." Claire shook her head. "This is sick." Harold let out a low chuckle. Claire turned, eyes wild. "You knew?" Harold shrugged. "Of course I knew. I mop the floors and file the lawsuits. You think someone slips past me." He reached for his coffee, took a long sip. "Guess trash takes itself out," he muttered. Derek's hand curled into a fist, but Anthony stepped in front of him. "Don't," Anthony said. "You'll lose more than your deposit." Claire pointed at Maggie, voice shaking. "You think this makes you powerful?" "No," Maggie replied. "It makes me done. With pretending to be smaller than you. With waiting for people to wake up and treat me like I mattered." She took another step forward. "I gave you years of my life. I cleaned up your mistakes, paid off your messes, and when I asked for help, you ghosted me." Claire's mouth twitched, like she was about to speak, but Maggie cut her off. "I built something from the bottom. I watched you implode. And I let you." Claire looked away. Maggie stepped even closer, voice low now. "You thought silence meant weakness. You thought my absence meant you'd won." She leaned in. "But I was just preparing the terms of your exit." Behind the desk, Harold let out a low whistle. "Damn," he said softly. "That's poetry." Derek turned to Claire, voice low but sharp. "Did you know? Did you ever even check who was on the paperwork?" Claire didn't answer. Maggie turned toward the door. "You've got 28 days. I suggest packing early." Claire's hands trembled, fists clenched at her sides. As Maggie passed her, she stopped, just for a second. "You used to say some people were beneath you," she said. Then she looked Claire in the eye. "Turns out I was above you the whole time." She walked out, heels clicking on tile. Anthony followed. Harold opened a drawer and pulled out a roll of vacant unit tags. Claire stood frozen in place, eyes wide, breathing shallow, Derek looked down. No one moved. Outside, through the glass, Maggie never looked back. Maggie didn't hear the knock. She felt it. Fast. Frantic. Fist, not knuckle. She opened the door to find Claire standing on the porch, shoulders hunched, makeup smudged, a folder in her hand like it could protect her. Derek stood 2 steps behind, arms crossed, jaw locked so tight it looked like it hurt to breathe. "We need to talk," Claire said, voice raw. Maggie didn't move. "I gave you 30 days. "We know," Derek snapped. Claire touched his arm lightly. "Please, Maggie, just 5 minutes." Maggie stared at her, expression unreadable, then stepped aside. Inside, the room smelled like fresh coffee and quiet triumph. Maggie had been reading by the window. The power broker lay spine up on the armrest. A record played softly in the background, something instrumental and slow. Claire sat first, clutching the folder. Derek stayed standing. "We've been doing the math," Claire began, breath shaky. "And we can't make it work. Not in 30 days. Not without help." Maggie raised one brow. Claire opened the folder, pulling out printed bank statements, a handwritten budget, a blurry screenshot of a Craigslist listing. "If we could get 60 days, maybe even 45, we could sublet the car, find short-term housing, sell a few more things. Maybe even clear what we owe." "You think I care about your car now?" Maggie asked quietly. Claire blinked, thrown. "I begged you," Maggie said, tone still low but heavy with weight. "For space, for respect. To stop turning me into your errand girl and emotional punching bag." She leaned forward. "You gave me nothing." "We didn't know," Claire said quickly. "I mean, we didn't realize." "No," Maggie cut in. "You didn't care." Derek finally spoke. "You've made your point. You got what you wanted. You're not the underdog anymore. Fine," he pointed at Claire. "But she's unraveling. We're not just losing an apartment. We're losing our stability. Our life." Maggie stood slowly. "Funny. That's how I felt when I slept on a friend's couch for 6 months, after you iced me out of your wedding without even a phone call." Claire's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Maggie walked over to the bookshelf, pulled a small wooden box from the top shelf, and held it in her palm. "You remember this?" Claire squinted. "Is that the gift I made for your bridal shower? You never opened it. Left it in the guest bathroom under the sink. I found it 2 months later, dust-covered and untouched." Claire looked away. "I begged," Maggie said again, her voice cracking, not from weakness, but the release of truth. "For dignity, you gave me none." Claire stood abruptly, eyes wet. "We'll be homeless." Maggie didn't flinch. "That's your consequence, not my responsibility." Claire stepped closer. "You don't mean that. Not really. You're not cruel." Maggie met her eyes. "I used to wonder if I was too soft for this world. Turns out I was just in the wrong rooms with the wrong people." Claire's hands shook. "We were friends." "No," Maggie said. "I was a friend. You were a user." Derek let out a low scoff. "You know what? Screw this." He grabbed the folder off the table and headed for the door. Claire turned toward him, startled. "Derek." "I'm not groveling to someone who spent years envying our lives and waited for us to fall apart just to kick us while we were down." He opened the door, slammed it hard behind him. Claire stood frozen. Maggie walked over and opened the door again, calmly, quietly. "You should go too." Claire's voice came out soft. "You really won't reconsider?" Maggie looked at her for a long moment. "I did reconsider, every day for 2 years, and you never noticed." Claire's chin trembled. Her shoulders slumped, but she didn't argue. She stepped out onto the porch, the air sharp and dry. September wind pulled at the edges of her coat. Maggie didn't watch her walk away. She closed the door slowly, turned the record back on, and returned to her chair. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The conference room on the 14th floor smelled like leather, ink, and cold ambition. A brushed steel pen sat atop a glossy folder labeled Sale Willow Court Complex. Final disbursement. Maggie leaned back in her chair, palms flat on the polished table. The view behind her stretched wide. Rooftops, freeway lanes, and the broken skyline of a city that never gave handouts. Anthony sat across from her, glasses low on his nose, reviewing the final page with meticulous calm. "You're sure?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Maggie nodded once. Anthony turned the folder toward her and clicked his pen. Sign here, initial here, and here. 3 swipes of her signature sealed it. With that, Windward Properties and everything it ever stood for no longer belonged to her. The room went still. Anthony closed the folder and tapped the top gently. "You just sold that building for $5.8 million. Maggie smiled, slow and real. Funny what a few years of silence and patience can earn. Anthony leaned back. There's a kind of poetry to it. She looked out the window. Down there, Claire and Derek were probably packing, or pretending to. Either way, the clock was ticking, and the building was no longer hers to watch them fail in. That chapter was done. This part was bigger. Anthony opened another folder, thinner, embossed in dark navy. The trust is already structured. 35% goes into the Langston Relief Fund. Maggie cut in gently. Change the name. Take theirs off it. Anthony raised an eyebrow. Any preference? She smiled faintly. The Sparrow Fund. He nodded, adjusted the page. Sparrow Fund it is. Dedicated to single working-class women aged 30 and up, facing transitional housing instability. Maggie nodded. We help the ones who don't qualify for sympathy anymore. He looked up at her. And the scholarship program? Full tuition and housing. Community colleges first. Expand later. Anthony gave a low whistle. You're not just walking away from a profit, Maggie. You're building something real. I'm rebuilding me. A knock sounded at the glass. Harold stepped in, hat in hand, tie slightly askew. They said you were wrapping up, he said. Didn't want to miss it. Maggie stood and shook his hand. You never missed anything, he grinned, deep lines in his cheeks. Best damn landlord I ever worked with. She chuckled. You say that to all the owners. Not the ones who let pipes freeze just to cut corners. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a small folded napkin. Inside it, an old brass key. The boiler room master key, he said, just in case you ever miss us. Maggie took it and turned it over in her palm. No danger of that, she said. From the far end of the table, Sophie walked in with 2 small glasses of champagne and a bottle tucked under her arm. Am I late? She asked. Just in time, Maggie said. Sophie poured. They raised their glasses. To the deal of the year, Sophie said, tapping rims. Smartest contract I've ever closed. Clean, fast, and profitable. Maggie held her glass up, then paused. Her eyes glinted, but her smile didn't turn soft. To being tossed like trash, she said. Best lesson I ever got. They clinked, drank. Outside the window, the city moved on, unaware. But Maggie wasn't watching the skyline anymore. She was done staring at the past. She picked up her coat, folded the contract into her tote, and turned toward the elevator. As the doors closed, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. A new notification blinked. Deposit received. Sparrow Fund account. Her finger hovered for a moment. Then she swiped it away. No need to watch it grow. She already knew it would. The tea kettle whistled low in the corner, steam curling into sunlight that pooled across Maggie's hardwood floor. She moved slowly now, deliberately, not because her body had aged, but because her life had stopped running on other people's timelines. No buzz of texts, no performance of normalcy, no crisis, just calm. On the kitchen table sat a small stack of handwritten envelopes, opened and arranged in a fan. The handwriting was uneven, hopeful. One note read, You believed in me before I could believe in myself. Thank you for letting me dream out loud. It was signed, Elena C., Sparrow Scholar, Class of 27. Maggie set her teacup down beside it and smiled. Not wide, just warm. That kind of peace doesn't perform. A soft knock came at the front screen. One tap, then a pause, then another. She rose and opened the door to find Ruth standing on the porch with a pie in one hand and a deck of cards in the other. "Brought you something sweet and something savage," Ruth said. "Pick your poison." Maggie stepped aside to let her in. "You just want a rematch." "No," Ruth said. "I want revenge." "Different thing entirely," they laughed. The kettle clicked off in the background as Maggie poured a second cup. Ruth wandered to the table and picked up one of the letters. "This one's got hearts over her eyes," she said, grinning. "Dangerous." "She's pre-med," Maggie said. "Scared out of her mind, but brilliant." Ruth set the note down gently. "You did something rare." "I did what I could," Maggie said. They played one hand of gin rummy, then another. Near sunset, the door opened again, this time without knocking. Sophie stepped in, sunglasses pushed up on her head, to-go bag in hand. "I brought soup, because the world's ending," she said, "and because you hate cooking." "False," Maggie said. "I hate grocery stores. There's a difference." Sophie kissed her on the cheek, sat down, and opened the container. The scent of lemongrass and ginger filled the room. "You know," she said between bites, "I've closed a dozen deals since Willow, but that one's legacy level." Maggie leaned back in her chair. "It was never just about the building," Sophie nodded. "Exactly." They ate in silence for a while. Ruth won another hand. Sophie refilled her glass. The room felt stretched wide with trust. Then Anthony appeared in the doorway, suit jacket off, briefcase in hand. He waved a thick manila envelope. "Certified letter came to the office today." Maggie didn't flinch. "From her?" Sophie asked. Anthony nodded. Thinly veiled legal threat. Some nonsense about emotional damages and coercive strategy. Maggie sipped her tea, steady. She always hated being outmaneuvered. Anthony handed her the envelope. She didn't open it. "You're untouchable," he said. "Every transaction, every signature, airtight. The sale's over, the funds registered. She can't lay a finger on you." "She already tried," Maggie said, "and failed." Anthony folded the envelope and slid it back into his case. "Just say the word if you want it shredded." "I'll keep it," Maggie said softly. "Let it remind me how far I climbed." He nodded, then stood to leave. "You know where to find me." After he left, the others stayed. Just quiet company, no noise, no chaos, no performance. Only one sound remained, the faint creak of the wooden house settling into the earth, like even it had finally exhaled. Maggie looked around the room. The silence didn't scare her. It felt like armor. The shredder whirred softly, steady and slow, as the certified letter disappeared line by line. Maggie never opened it. She didn't need to. The paper curled and vanished into ribbons, the ink meaningless by the time the last corner slipped through. She slid the machine back beneath her desk and opened the small filing cabinet beside it. Neatly labeled tabs greeted her. Sparrow Fund, tuition waivers, real estate sale, final, no clutter, no drama, only order. She tucked away the original trust deed, smoothed the folder flat, and pushed the drawer closed with a quiet click. Then she walked to the kitchen, poured a fresh cup of black coffee, and settled by the window. Outside, her garden was still. Wind touched the leaves lightly, but didn't disturb them. Beyond the hedges, a mail truck pulled away, and 2 kids rode by on bikes, laughing like the world had never gone cold. Maggie wrapped both hands around the mug and took a sip. She hadn't slept this well in years. The phone rang once. She let it ring again, then picked up. "Hey, boss," Harold said, voice bright. "Just got confirmation from the new manager." Langston's turned in the keys. No incident. Units clean. Locks changed. Eviction complete. Maggie didn't smile at first. She just let the words sink in. "Good," she said at last. There was a pause on the other end. She let it stretch. Then, "Now she knows the cost of cruelty." Harold gave a low whistle. "You want me to send over the final inventory?" "No," Maggie said. "It's over." She hung up before he could reply. Not to be rude, just done. She set the phone down gently, took another sip of coffee, and let the moment fill her. Peace didn't have to roar. Sometimes it just settled. She walked to the living room, adjusted a frame on the mantel. A photo of herself, younger, holding a cake shaped like a graduation cap. Claire was next to her in that photo, barely 20, forced smile, already looking away from the camera. Maggie didn't linger. She didn't need to. She turned back to the desk, ran one hand over the smooth surface, and picked up her pen. Not to write, just to feel something solid in her fingers, something earned. She thought of the women who would sit in scholarship interviews one day, nervous, overlooked, underestimated, just like she had been. She thought of the keys Claire had once tossed on her coffee table, telling her she could figure out a bus route, now that she didn't need to borrow the Lexus. She thought of every whispered insult, every side comment, every absence that weighed more than a punch. And then she smiled, softly, for herself. Outside, wind curled around the corner of the house and moved on. She didn't chase it. She didn't chase anything anymore. She just whispered into the room like it could still hear her. My own daughter tossed me out like garbage. She reached for the light switch. So I quietly bought her building. She clicked it off and raised her rent to the sky.